ministers there from the president saying, God be with you. And that's a prayer for them. And that prayer should be backed with actions. And let's take a look at those actions that we expect from this cabinet. My guests are joining me right now. Kelvin Emmanuel is the Chief Executive Officer of Dairy Hills Limited. Hello, Kelvin, and welcome back.
Good morning.
Good morning. Dr. Uche Igwe, visiting fellow, Firoz Ladji Institute for African London School for Economics and Political Science, joins us from Uyo. Welcome to you, Dr. Igwe. Thank you again for joining us. We have a lot to talk about, and this is a continuation of where we stopped last week, Wednesday. It was as if the president was listening to us on the show. I don't know if you guys noticed it. Immediately we finished.
Oh, yeah,
Isn't it, Dr. Igwe? You want to respond? It was as if he listened to
exactly,
us that
exactly.
day. I said, Baba, go slow now. You are turning to Baba, go slow. Get us these ministers from our own analysis. And in fact, that was the day, it happened. So, Dr. Igwe, what are your views, first of all, taking it from where we stopped last week?
Well, I think the first thing to say is a bit of responsiveness on the part of government. We just barely finished our interaction, and boom, we saw the list circulating of allocation of portfolios. I think there are a few impressive names on the list, and predictably, of course, we saw Wale Edu, the financial part of things, Ali Pate on health, and a few other names, just as we predicted. So I think that what is important now is, according to the president, how fast and how soon they can hit the ground running, and all the urgent issues. Top on the list is the issue of poverty and the issue of inflation, and of course the palliatives, how the government can approach, all the efforts to make sure that the impact of the removal of the subsidies do not negatively continue to, disproportionately affect the poor. And again, where do they find the resources to implement some of these issues? And on top of it is the curbing of oil theft, 400,000 barrels of oil per day. That kind of hemorrhage is unacceptable. And I think that if the president will find the resources he needs to fund some of the urgent issues of the economy, I think a strong look at the efforts government is trying to put in place to make sure that we begin to recover our oil. 400,000 barrels per day in dollar terms, Nancy, is a lot of money. And of course, the issue of insecurity is something that, this government will expect to also look into very urgently. So I'll
Okay.
stop it here. And there are so many other things, but I'll come back to later.
Okay. Kelvin, were you surprised with Dele Alake in solid minerals, solid minerals development ministry? In fact, I was watching something, was it last night or this morning, when he said uh, his ministry is that is his own assignment is the greatest shocker. That many Nigerians did not expect that. And from the guesses that were even on last week here, so it's like, okay, Alake will be information minister. But now the president has shocked everyone, and Alake seems to be very excited and optimistic about that ministry. So what's your reaction towards that, as well as the agenda even for the solid mineral sector? Because Alake also mentioned yesterday that, of course, the world is moving away from oil. The next place to look at is, of course, solid minerals. What do you think?
Yeah, thank you very much. I take the words and promises of politicians with a pinch of salt. So beyond the
Isn't that too
promises,
pessimistic?
no, like it's very easy to make promises, and we've been front and center to politicians making promises in Nigeria. Okay, um, well, solid minerals is very critical, but for me, it's important that the Tinubu government pay attention to Schedule 39 in the exclusive legislative list that separates solid minerals from oil and gas, and that moves solid minerals from exclusive to concurrent. Because I maintain that as far as solid minerals stays under the exclusive legislative list, there isn't much the government can do. And this has always been the problem. Allow the states to control their solid mineral resources.
But that's also very capital intensive.
It's very capital intensive.
Can the states afford that?
You see, this is the reason why I've said to you, Nancy, that there is an elephant in the room, and the elephant in the room is fiscal federalism, changing the principles of derivation, landmass, equity of states, population, IGR, and derivation. These are the 5 principles that makes or establishes the Revenue Mobilization and Fiscal Allocation Commission. You have that formula as 55, 29, 16. 55 for the federal government, 29 for the states, 16 for the local governments. Apart from the fact that you have a battle between the federal government, state governments, and local governments in the federating units, the state governments don't want the local governments to control their own resources. The state governors want to control the local resources of the local governments. You have a problem with the principles of derivation. The principle of derivation is the reason why states are encumbered. You have a lot of states, when you look at their fiscal position and their fiscal strategy paper, a lot of states are in debt. There are states owing 100 billion, 180, 400 billion. There are states paying 2, 3, 4, 5 billion. They have irrevocable standing payment orders to their FAC account, debited from source. When it comes down to the states, the governors are only able to pay salaries of civil servants. They're not able to embark on any capital project. If you give the states more financial autonomy, what is going to happen is that the states will be forced to think on how to generate IGR. IGR is the solution. You see this idea where you give 5 billion naira to state as palliative to share and share rice. In 2023, it's ridiculous and it's dumbfounding.
No, how is it ridiculous for a country that is poverty-stricken, for a country that is faced with hunger?
This is why you need to change the formula for revenue allocation. Allow the states to generate their own revenue and pay royalties to the center. You asked this question about solid minerals.
Yes.
And I'm telling you, Nancy, that without giving the states autonomy over their solid mineral assets, for them to be able to develop public-private partnerships through state investment corporations, bring in companies, set up a mining framework like you have in the oil and gas industry. You give out mining prospecting license, you give out mining licenses. They share revenues, they pay taxes to the states generate IGR, and they pay royalties to the federal government. This is how to unleash the power of solid mineral assets, lithium, gold, tin, bauxite, aluminium, all kinds of solid minerals you have scattered all over Nigeria.
Okay. So these are your own key points of action for the solid mineral sector. As Dele Alake assumes office, of course, he's now the Minister of Solid Minerals. Is there any other thing you would want him to do as a minister, or any other impending, because what you've also raised are impediments that will not make him succeed? Are there some quick wins there for us? Quick wins in the area of, there are a lot of illegal mining going on in the country.
There are illegal miners because the federal government has failed to do its job as a regulator. The federal government wants to play two positions. It wants to be a player and a regulator. It doesn't work that way. That's why you have a lot of artisanal miners and you have smuggling of mineral resources that are mined in Nigeria.
Okay.
Under the nose of the federal government. And this also comes back to the fact that the Minister of Solid Minerals has to work with the Minister of Justice. Because if you're going to review the legislative list and do a 6th constitutional alteration, you need to involve the Minister of Justice. This comes back to the question on the recommendation of the CONFAB, 2014 CONFAB report that was pioneered by Kenny Namani and Iyocha Ayu, on the issue of separating the offices of the Attorney General of the Federation from the Minister of Justice.
But now we have Minister of Justice and Attorney General. So it seems the President did not listen to that. So what good can we make with what we have now?
You need a 6th constitutional alteration. You need to review the exclusive legislative list. There are items on that list that should be on the concurrent list. Example, Schedule 39 of the exclusive legislative list that talks about solid minerals, oil, and gas.
Okay. Dr. Igwe, what other key points of actions would you give to these ministers? You want to choose them? Let me give you the opportunity to do that. We have 45 ministers. What key points of actions? At our last discussion, last week, it's like the president is even listening. You really raised that there was no Niger Delta minister. And we saw on Sunday that that list was reshuffled, as it were, at least a few people there. Abubakar Momo, now the minister of Niger Delta. So what are your key points of actions? That's KPAs, not even KPIs now. Key point of actions for these ministers, perhaps like 30 days, 60 days, or whatever, or however you want to put it.
Well, I think that an important and cross-cutting issue for me is the how for the distribution of the palliatives. And I'm sure you know about the National Register. Questions are being asked about how the numbers and the persons on that list were generated, and whether it is, is there's any form of partisanship in it. It is important to transparently tell us the criteria that is being used to generate the National Social Register, and also tell us whether they are in the last 3 years or 4 years since the distribution of palliatives and interventions to reduce poverty, whether some people have left that list. It is crucial to know whether some people have already left the list, and also to make sure that the list is insulated from any form of partisanship. I think what is important, my colleague has said a couple of things for the future. What is important for us in the country at the moment is the now. How get drowned into the inflation that is making life unbearable for everyone. Those are the quick wins, I think, that the president needs to key into. I have spoken about oil theft. And thankfully, there is a Niger Delta minister. Of course, there's also the Minister of State for Petroleum, and again, the one on gas. I think all of them should put their heads together to find out what we need to do. Of course, also the minister in charge of finance, to look at the numbers again and see what can be done to reduce oil theft. In fact, if we're able to have the numbers from the 400,000, Nancy, you can imagine the amount, part of the list that many people have. The minister in charge of the Fed has insecurity in his state. He would.
Oh, okay, Dr. Igwe, we can't hear you again. I don't know what has happened. Is the okay? The network has really gone gaga there. Not Lady Gaga though. So let's come back to Kelvin here. Let's try to reconnect with Dr. Igwe, and when he comes up, let me know. Okay, Dr. Igwe, of course, has spoken about palliatives. So it's perhaps looking at poverty alleviation, and he raised some salient points. Let us even know those. We need to get an efficient, a transparent social register that also the states can also adopt. Because if you take a look at the NEC meeting that was held, not this last one, the former one where Governor Soludo did speak about um, the palliatives and all of that. But let's move away from that. Let's come over to macroeconomic stability, because I think that economic challenges are really facing us right now. What are the daunting tasks before Waliedo right now? We have inflation at 24%. It's been estimated that it may get to 28% or even 30% by the end of this year. We have economic growth that is growing at less than population growth. FX reserves, JP Morgan just came up with something that is very startling, and I'm actually also wondering, I'm torn between the devil and the WC. And let me explain what I mean. 3.4 or 3.7 billion dollars our FX reserves. That figure, of course, was taken from the financial report. They did a study on the financial statements that the CBN released last week. Why I said I'm torn between the devil and the blue sea is a lot of people have said, let the central bank come out to say, this is how much we have in our FX reserves. Some are also of the school of thought. In fact, I saw a video, I think, of the central bank governor of Singapore, if I'm not mistaken. I don't know if you saw that. And he said that it's a policy for them not to disclose their foreign exchange reserves. Why? Because if you disclose it, your enemies, so to say, or so to speak, your economic saboteurs would know the weapon you have in your arsenal, and they can come for you.
That's odd. That's odd, considering that the Central Bank of Singapore participated in the currency swap foreign support line for intra-central bank lending from the U.S. Federal Reserve many years ago.
I understand what you're saying, but this is something, I don't know, but do you understand why I am saying that? Because he actually was of the opinion, if they know, a lot of attacks could come for them, and they will begin to, expend their foreign reserves. But anyway, I just needed to bring that in, different economic theories. So speak on that. Macroeconomic stability, Wale Edun, and the issues.
First of all, Nigeria needs an industrial policy, and this is the reason why I think the Minister of Trade and Investment, Dr. Doris Anite, is also very critical. She needs to redefine the tariffs, she needs to redefine backward integration programs, she needs to redefine import waivers, tax waivers, pioneer status. She needs to coordinate with the Minister of Finance, because the coordinating Minister of the Economy. This first task is to integrate 62 MDA revenue collection into the Federal Inland Revenue Service, which I think is a masterstroke, and is going to increase the revenue to GDP ratio from 7.9%. Every 1% in that revenue to GDP ratio that you add $4.4 billion to the collections of the federal government. So he has a task of raising that revenue to GDP ratio as a way to migrate Nigeria in that medium-term expenditure framework currently that depends on the deficit financing. It's currently about 43.8 to 45% to the budget. He has to migrate it away from debt to revenue to reduce the debt servicing. Because if you look at Nigeria's debt obligations, between 2024 and 2026, the government is supposed to pay about $4.2 billion in debt servicing and refinancing costs to creditors, both locally and internationally. Amortizations and coupons. So he needs to migrate the government away. His major task is to bring in revenues. He also needs to supervise and coordinate the process of ensuring that the fiscal policy of the government anchors monetary policy, and that there is changes to the CBN Act and the Foreign Exchange Act, especially the CBN Act. It needs to work with the National Assembly, the heads of the Senate committees and House committees.
Should there be a change to the CBN Act, or should there be compliance to what we have right now?
The CBN Act, there are certain sections
that gives powers to the governor. Is that the areas you're looking at?
Not just that gives powers to the BOFIA also, the BOFIA of 2020 also needs amendment that regulates the banks and other financial institutions. But the CBN Act, certain sections in the CBN Act, sections 50, sections 38, sections 24, sections 20, that is due for amendment and that are critical. For example, if you look at sections 38, the violation of sections 38 was the reason why you have $53 billion on ways and means that was sterilized. And somehow, that interest that the government was the CBN was collecting from the federal government as overdrafts, MPRO plus 3, was a saving grace because the net interest income grew and was a saving grace, and that was the reason why the CBN didn't go to solvency, considering all the liabilities it had and all the loan loss provisioning it did in the last 3 years of its financial cycle. So Wale Edun has a responsibility to anchor fiscal policy and ensure that it drives monetary policy, because there has been a disconnect between fiscal and monetary policy. The government has gone on an expansionary monetary policy drive, right, that has not led to growth, that has not increased supply, that has squeezed the banking system and squeeze the ability of the banks in Nigeria to lend money to the real sector.
But if you take a look at it too, the monetary policies around the world really went expansionary. I'm not defending the central bank, but I'm just bringing to bear experiences from other central banks across the world because of the pandemic. where we've seen helicopter money, and all the economies that did that because of COVID are suffering from it, high inflation and all of that, and they are trying to do fire brigade style now in terms of the UK, the US. We know how much the US pumped into the system. The UK also pumped into the system because of COVID. So um, would you really actually now put all the blame on the Central Bank of Nigeria, where all the central banks of the world, majority of them, were trying to save the economy
When you look
from
at
COVID?
when you look at the expansionary monetary policy that the U.S. Federal Reserve did, you notice that it's within the ambit of the law.
Okay, so you're saying, of
And
course,
they
that
scaled back. And monetary policy, the U.S. the Federal Open Market Committee,
FOMC,
raising the interest rates in the U.S., the federal funds rate, has led to the reduction of inflation in the U.S. to 3.2%. Inflation in America is responding to monetary policy. In Nigeria,
it doesn't respond.
it doesn't respond.
Okay,
Why?
so now I understand what you're saying, because there's a limit. The law says 5%. Now it's even been increased to 15% before the last National
Ways and
Assembly.
Means is currently 30.1 trillion. 23.8 has been sterilized into 9% per annum. The CBN is going to get net interest income from that. But the question is, what is going to be the impact of that on the debt servicing load of the federal government?
Okay. Dr. Igwe, we have you back now. Let's take a look at, can you give me some ministries that are perhaps key ministries that you will be focusing on in this administration? Then I'll come to the later part of my question.
Okay, I think that the Ministry of Humanitarian Affairs is very key, of course, because of the promises she's made about lifting. I listened to her a few minutes ago, lifting 133 million persons out of poverty. That's a tall order. And I will be watching her activities very close. Ali Pate, coming from COVID and recovery and the health system and all that's happened, and how this impacts directly and indirectly on poverty. I will also be looking at the Minister of Defense. I was speaking about Matawale and his credentials for that position a moment ago, especially looking at the fact that the issues in his state continue to linger, and whether that was a strategic decision by the president himself to bring him at the national level, and how qualified, looking at his antecedents, is he to take such a position. So we'll be looking at the Minister of Defense and the Niger Delta Ministry, of course. You referred to the decision the president made to give the Niger Delta a minister. What implications has this got, especially on the Niger Delta Development Commission? We read about some of the back-end issues about whether it is appropriate to have a minister, whether bureaucracy is impacting positively or negatively on the performance of the Niger Delta Development Commission, and how the NDDC will function as a coordinator of sustainable development in the Niger Delta region, and also issues of stability, how the appointment of the minister will impact on the stability of that organization. As you know, the organization has been quite unstable, having so many boards and managing directors, and many people are saying that it would be important to give the current management some time, to be able to see, how they can perform. So yes, these are very key ministries. Of course, the Minister of Finance, how he can coordinate the whole lot of the economy to be able to match rhetoric with action, because the inflationary numbers, and indeed how this also impacts on the leadership of the central bank. As you know, what has happened in the past with the former central bank governor, and how soon a new one will come to be able to make sure that the issues that my colleague raised can be looked into very quickly. So we are all watching, Nigerians are watching. We are giving the president the benefit of doubt. He said he will hit the ground running. Better late than never. But I think that these key ministries, and the persons in charge of it. Not to forget the FCT minister and the FCT ministry. We also saw the clip where he talked about, pulling down structures, and whether this is too early is also another conversation people are having, and whether this fits into an overall roadmap, to make sure that the FCT is cleaned up. Beyond pulling down houses, it's also important to have a holistic approach to what he wants to do in that key ministry.
Okay.
So these are the ministries many of us
that you're looking at: Poverty Ministry, Defense, Niger Delta, FCT. So 4 for you out of these ones that we have 45 ministers being sworn in.
Well, 4 key.
4 key for you.
4 key for me. There are many others, but I think that it is important to sort of zero in on these very strategic ministries.
Okay.
Of course, disciplinary boundaries continue to all these things all overlap with each other. But yes, 4 for now.
Kelvin, which are yours?
I'll take trade and investment. I'll take finance. I think the situation in Niger Republic is the first test for Yusuf Tuga.
That's foreign.
Considering he was ambassador to Germany.
That's foreign affairs.
He's an accomplished career ambassador. And also considering that depending on how these negotiations with Niger Republic is handled, there's a risk that the military junta might close the River Niger channel from Niger, and we're going to have issues in Nigeria. So on all the issues of export of uranium, of gold, on the spillover to the borders of Sokoto, Zamfara, and all the states in the northwest, it's the first litmus test for his ability to handle a foreign crisis. He also has to work with the aviation minister to sort out the issues with the airlines, and that has led to the UAE, for example, banning Nigeria from entering their country, certain sections of Nigeria because of their outstanding for Emirates Airlines. But more importantly, we have to come back to Ministry of Petroleum, Ministry of Gas Resources. The Ministry of Gas Resources minister has a task to, deregulate gas prices, to work on internal high-pressure transmission pipes to distribute methane gas, export pipelines like NMGP, because TSGP is encumbered by the situation in the Niger Republic. You have Minister of Petroleum. Minister of Petroleum Resources needs to work on clarifying the PIA for NLNG, for Train 8, Train 9, and Train 10, especially Train 8. The CEO of NLNG has complained about it. He has to work on increasing the drilling rigs. He has to coordinate with the security chiefs to reduce crude oil theft in Niger Delta so that Nigeria can meet up with its OPEC quota. He has to work on the fiscal path and strategy with the Minister of Finance and coordinating Minister of Economy on whether Nigeria is going to stay in OPEC or stay in the Declaration of Cooperation. And this is because if you look at the forward guidance for OPEC, OPEC does not plan to reduce Nigeria's quota above 2.2, 2.5 million barrels, regardless of how much production goes within the next 3 or 4 years.
Just like, I think it's Olupobiri, yes, the Minister of State Petroleum now was saying yesterday, my agenda here is increase production, increase production. That's what he said yesterday. And I was saying, okay, increase production, increase production. Will you increase it more than your OPEC quota? Where will you sell it?
He has more sophisticated and complicated duties because he has to supervise the process of taking NNPC to an IPO. Or
perhaps it's also increased production than what we're doing now. Let's meet our OPEC quota. Is that what he was saying? I was trying to get a sense from his own speech yesterday.
Stakeholders in the petroleum industry, upstream, midstream, will tell him otherwise that he has more pressing issues on it. Increasing production is important and very critical to Nigeria's export earnings and NNPC receipts, considering that NNPC went to take a resource-backed loan from Afrexim Bank to help stabilize the FX situation in Nigeria. But NNPC needs to be supervised very carefully and skillfully to an IPO.
Are you surprised that President Tinubu is like the petroleum minister? Because both of them are states gas resources, states petroleum. So are you surprised when that list came out last week that is like the president is still leaving himself as the Minister of Petroleum?
I'm not.
Or exactly what does it mean? Is he going to give them the full backing to do the work as Minister of State?
I'm not surprised considering that there's precedence. But I am disappointed because, we keep doing the same thing and expecting to get a different result. Yeah, the petroleum ministry, like we've said, needs somebody who understands oil and gas. Unfortunately, we've not gotten somebody who understands oil and gas. And you need somebody who can also be active and on the road. Not somebody who is going to sit in his office in central area and be collecting reports from
But Lopobiri said he's a
subordinates and
creek.
aides.
He said he's a creek boy. He mentioned it yesterday. I'm a creek boy, so I'm going to go there.
Reducing crude oil theft is not the only work and is not the only task that the Minister of Petroleum is saddled with right now. Nigeria has other very pressing issues for the Ministry of Petroleum Resources.
You think it's not just crude oil theft?
Now, the JP Morgan report says that the government is planning to draw down its stake and raise $17 billion for the FX markets to stabilize it. I would, for example, not advise them to draw down their equity in NLNG. It will be better for them to go to the market and start getting investment bankers to audit this NNPC, forensic audit, do book building, and go for an IPO. If you want to raise capital, you can't rush the process. You can't just call investors and say, oh, we have these assets, we need money, and we need money now. It's a process. It takes time. It takes 6 to 12 months.
Okay. For you, Kelvin, trade, finance, foreign affairs, petroleum, gas resources. Those are just the 4 you've mentioned. Dr. Igwe also mentioned 4. And I've also noticed that for many Nigerians, we're also caught in the web of not speaking about some other ministries that perhaps we can also have quick wins, or perhaps looking at those ministries that have been underperformers in the last few years. I didn't, of course, when we are even talking of ministers, or even in most analysis, even in the media, you don't get to hear like, okay, we have a minister of tourism now. Before, there used to be Ministry of Information, Culture and Tourism. Then information is now information and national orientation. It's just that last administration we had a vocal information minister who was not really liked. As it were, Minister Lai Mohammed. But if you're talking right now about some of the underperforming ministries, and let me talk, okay, now we have Ministry of Arts and Culture. There's a Ministry of Sports too. What kind of agenda should we be setting for these ministries? There's a Ministry of Science and Technology, for example. There's a Ministry of Steel Development now. I don't want us also to take our eyes off those ministries. What kind of issues, what is the agenda for the Ministry of Science and Technology, for example, the Ministry of Steel Development, the Ministry of Arts is now Arts, Culture and Creative Economy, the Ministry of Tourism, even though we know that Nigeria is plagued with insecurity concerns. Kelvin, you're looking at me, you didn't expect this question. Okay, Dr. Igwe, respond to that. For example, in science and technology, I was taking a look at it. In South Africa, for example, many years ago, they churned out over 80,000 scientific papers that are useful for production activities in their economy. Egypt should be, I think, about 60,000. In Nigeria, as at the last count, perhaps about 28,000 scientific papers. So what do you have to say about that? Dr. Igwe, over to you.
Well, I would add 2 ministries on the list. I would add the Ministry of Innovation and Digital Economy. And I will also add the Ministry of Marine and Blue Economy. These are very important ministries, and I would say that for that of digital economy, I think that the whole expectation of the Nigerian digital transformation roadmap, leveraging on the experience we had from COVID, jobs can be created remotely. And I would add that ministry on my list, especially how that ministry will be able to create jobs for youthful population across the country. Jobs and jobs and jobs, they are key for me. Very related also is the Ministry of Marine and Blue Economy. As you know, blue economy, it's not something that is entirely new. It's something that's been going on, but it's becoming a cliche, for want of a better word. So how that ministry would develop in the light of the new dynamics of the Africa Blue Economy strategy by the African Union and the one by the United Nations, especially how that ministry can assist creating blue jobs. And these are jobs that can be derived, from the blue economy arena, from tourism to coastal
Question,
communities,
yeah.
and also how all of these ministries, for instance, can look at the issue of flooding, which is the other side of blue economy. On the Ministry of Science and Technology, I think that is also a key ministry. And I think that the issue of development of scientific temper, among our young people is something I think it is important to put on their to-do list. For our young people to be innovative, I think that it's important to use a catch them young approach to develop their scientific temper. So yes, there's a lot to copy from copy and adapt, and contextualize from what is happening in other countries. You mentioned South Africa, and I think that the Nigerian Ministry of Science and Technology is a key ministry that could begin to, spend more time on STEM, science, technology, engineering, and
Engineering,
mathematics,
yeah, engineering
and
and math,
mathematics,
yeah.
to ensure that, we have this awareness among our young people and deepen their scientific temper and make them to continue to be self-reliant. And again, linking this to the ICT ministry and digital economy and how these can focus on creating jobs. So I add three more ministries to my list: digital economy, blue economy, and health.
Okay, blue there, not green.
I,
Blue
I want
economy.
to add three,
No,
Blue,
three ministries
blue
also.
economy, yes.
yes, I don't know, doctor, if you answered my question. No. You just added ministries to it. I was actually talking about even the cooperation or the coordination of some of these ministries. Or let's even begin to take a look at these ministries that hitherto we don't really pay attention to. I would add even the Ministry of Women Affairs to it. Why we are interested now in Ministry of Poverty Alleviation and Humanitarian Affairs perhaps is also the issue of palliatives. I added the Ministry of Science and Tech.
Nancy,
I added the issue
interestingly,
of steel development. I added the Ministry of Sports. You know, these are ministries that don't get so much of media attention. Also, these are ministries that are not, in quotes, almost adequately funded. They are anything, oh, they are poorly funded. They are poorly funded. And attention is given to other ministries, works, power, housing, petroleum, and all of that. When their ministers come, oh, they will attend to them, okay, approve, approve. But these are also ministers or ministries that may not have the necessary wherewithal in terms of finance to do their work. Doctor, just 1 minute to answer,
Nancy,
then I'll
let me
come
tell
to
you,
Kelvin. Yes.
I don't really think that the fact that ministries don't have adequate media attention translates to the fact that they don't have funding. Minister of Sports, for instance, is a key ministry developing these talents. I mean, sports is a very huge industry internationally,
Dr. Igwe, we
creating
have
a lot
access
of
to their
jobs. And in
budgets. We
trying
have
to,
access to these ministries and their budgets over the years. If you take a look
yes,
at it, yes, it's not
but I'm
commensurate
saying
to
that
what other ministries get.
why money is important to do all of this, there is also the part of it that doesn't require the kind of activities I'm talking about, developing these talents among young people, developing our sports industry, for instance, to become digital as it stands elsewhere and create jobs. Yes, it requires money, but not a lot of money. But I also think that there needs to be partnership, something you just talked about. We need to focus on creating jobs, be it Ministry of Science and Technology, be it Ministry of Sports, be it Ministry of Marine and Blue Economy. I think that the issue of unemployment, and limited employment, and even employability issues, among our youth population is a crucial thing. And
Okay,
I think that is an important rallying point for
okay,
all the ministries put together. Focus on the young people and create jobs. For me, that is a pathway to reducing poverty
Kelvin.
beyond the palliatives.
Okay, let me come to Kelvin. What are your views? And let me also just oppose it because we have about 5 minutes to the end. What kind of political will do we expect from Mr. President? so that these ministers will be enabled to do their jobs. Because the buck really stops at the president's table. If he can empower them with will, political will or backing, they'll be able to work. Then number two, the bureaucracy of the civil servants to be able to enable this minister's work is something we should also look
I
at.
think that's where the political will comes. The
Okay.
president needs to learn it from OBJ's years as president. OBJ did very well in managing the bureaucracy within the system. The president, I will advise that he also implements the Stephen Orasanye report. You know, despite the fact that labor is counter, I don't know how to put it. Labor is they are their own enemies because they are complaining about the cost of government, but they don't want the government to, you know, merge and reduce the size of the civil service and the public service in Nigeria. You know, maintaining it is about 5 trillion naira a year, which is insane. You know, and the only comprehensive report that has looked to address and reduce the size of government is the Stephen Orasanye report. I don't know what is in that report that is scaring a lot of presidents from implementing it. But I was going to add, I was going to add a few ministries. I was going to add, like Doctor said, I was going to
Are
add.
you adding a few ministries, or both of you should answer my questions about underperformers in the last few years, or since Nigeria has been born? Because do you understand what I'm saying? Now, a lot of people will say, oh, Minister of Finance, Trade and Investment. We would hardly talk about other ministries. We have 45 ministers for crying out loud.
The failure of monetary and fiscal policy is the reason why you have 133 million Nigerians in multidimensional poverty. And the reason why Beto Edio has a job as a minister of humanitarian affairs and poverty alleviation. You know, see, you have issues here. You have Ministry of Marine and Blue Economy, the Baka Deep Seaport in Akwa Ibom, the diversification of port operations to the eastern flank, the move away from the western flank is very critical. If you speak to businesses in the north, they will tell you they prefer ports in Calabar and Akwa Ibom and Port Harcourt to ports in Lagos. Okay? So the Minister of Marine and Blue Economy has a job to enforce and you know, stabilize maritime security through NIMASA, as well as diversify port operations to the eastern flank. I think that's going to be his biggest challenge. Calabar Deep Seaport, for example, has an issue with channel draft that has been on for years. They had an issue with the contractor from 2006. They were in court for more than 15 years. They settled last year, but nobody has been deployed to site, to the port, to raise the channel draft from 6 meters to 10, 12 meters that Panamax vessels need to dock at the port. You also have Akwa Ibom Seaport. It's critical. It's important that they get to work and they stop the talking. Okay? You have the Minister of Digital Economy. You have the challenge of increasing number of base transceiver stations in Nigeria. There's currently a board fight on the board of IHS between the shareholders of IHS. Yeah, he has to settle that fight. He has the issue of increasing broadband penetration access. Right-of-way charges has been slashed by 90%.
Issues of regulation for the sector.
Regulation. He has the issue of working with universal service provision, but which is interestingly led by Funke Opeke. To increase access because if you increase access of base transceiver stations around Nigeria to areas where traditional market conditions do not work, you raise financial inclusion.
Okay. It's like the
I was going to add environment because you also have the hydrocarbon. You also have the hydrocarbon remediation program for the cleanup of Ogoni and areas in Delta State, Bonga, oil spills that has been left because of issues around procurement fraud. So the Minister of Environment and Ecology has a challenge with that. He also has an issue of flooding.
Okay. It seems the more we speak about this, the more questions are to be asked. But we'll continue to look at this, of course, as the ministers have all resumed duty. I'm sure that if not all of them will be at work today. Dr. Igwe, thank you for joining us today. We'll keep the conversation going, definitely. Thank you for joining us from Uyo. So I'll talk to you soon. And Kelvin, Emmanuel, thank you very much for joining us. And that's our show today. Please join us again tomorrow, where we'll be looking at another angle concerning business, economy, finance, investment in the country. Like the president said yesterday, God be with you. That is my prayer for every one of us today and to the ministers, all eyes are on you. You are there to serve. This is a call to service, not a call for enrichment. I'll see you all again tomorrow. Be the best you can be and be the change that you want to see. I am Nancy. Bye now.